The desert night lies quiet, silvered by a patient moon. In the distance, stone rises against the horizon, the ancient Pyramids of Giza, their flanks glowing like frozen fire. Down a narrow shaft, hidden from the world above, a figure descends. His white mantle brushes against the wall, the red cross upon his chest flickering in torchlight. He does not come seeking gold, nor relics blessed by Rome. His steps fall softer, heavier, as though he enters not just the earth, but something older, something deeper. What did the Knights of the Temple truly discover beneath Egypt's stones? Was their downfall the result of envy and debt, or of a silence too dangerous to break? The fragments left behind, papyrus scrawled with warnings, ruins marked with foreign symbols, manuscripts carried under canvas in the night, suggest a secret sealed, a knowledge buried, a light hidden beneath stone. This is Serene Myths, where stories drift like echoes through history's corridors. If you wish, you may like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join the quiet conversation in the comments. Share where in the world and in what hour of night you are listening. And now let us follow the night further into shadow, where the air cools, where silence hums, and where the first step of this story begins. The desert night falls slowly, as if a great bronze lamp has been dimmed to a soft glow. The last warmth of the day clings to the sand, but already the cool breath of evening gathers in the hollows. At the horizon, the pyramids sit like patient guardians, their sides catching the faint silver of the rising moon. Somewhere near Giza, a knight of the temple, his mantle heavy with the crimson cross, dismounts in silence. His armor is muffled beneath travel-stained cloth. He carries no banner, no torch. Only the thin rasp of steel at his side whispers of his origin. He walks with a purpose into a shadow cut in stone, a mouth of a passage that the desert wind has kept hidden for centuries. The papyrus he carries, tied in worn linen, has already changed the direction of his life. It had not come from the hands of priest or scribe of Christendom, nor from the courts of nobles. It came from a blind elder of Cairo, a man known among the locals only by his silence and his long memory. The knight, Hugo de Pontois, one of the order's quieter captains, had received it under the cover of night. The fabric around it was marked with a strange device, a circle drawn around a triangle, a symbol that did not belong to either East or West. Within, the script spoke of those who lived before the pharaohs and of a place called the House of the Horizon, Akhenaten, in the tongue of forgotten dynasties. Along the margin, in hurried Arabic, the elder had written a warning. He who opens the chamber will not survive the song. A song, not a curse, not a spear, but something of sound. And at the very end, written in a hand that trembled with age, yet burned with conviction, were words that chilled Hugo more than the steel of his foes. The light beneath the stone has changed us. The Order had collected many documents during its campaigns, but never one like this. There were charters from kings, indulgences from popes, contracts of grain and timber. This papyrus, though, smelled not of ink and wax, but of dust and secrets. Its surface crackled when touched, and the faintest trace of incense lingered on it, as though it had been stored not in a library, but in a shrine. To hold it was to feel the weight of centuries pressing through the fibers. And so Hugo descended, the words echoing within him like the faint toll of a bell beneath the earth. In that hour, the desert was hushed. You can almost stand in his place, the sand still warm beneath your boots, the cool of the stone mouth breathing against your face. A torch would betray him, a voice would rouse suspicion. So he moved by touch, steel gauntlets brushing over the walls, rough to the hand, worn by older travelers. The darkness was complete, yet the air carried a vibration, almost a hum. Some said the chambers under Giza were designed to sing when the wind moved right. Others claimed they were fashioned to break intruders with echoes. Hugo, in silence, wondered if this was the song of the warning. For the Order, Egypt was not a land of conquest. It was not Jerusalem, nor Antioch, nor Acre. Yet records in the ship's ledgers spoke of supplies rerouted, of vessels docking in Damietta and Alexandria without obvious cause, of horses pressed through the sands of Sinai. Captives whispered of parchment in Coptic script, seized by men in white mantles. And somewhere in the margins of an equipment list was a note, manuscript received from the black-clad men of Mysa. All pointed not to treasure of gold, but to treasure of knowledge. Still, this papyrus was unlike any ordinary manuscript. Its voice seemed fractured, shifting between times. The House of the Horizon, it mentioned, was not Giza at all, but Akhetaten, city of the heretic king Akhenaten, long since swallowed by sand. Yet it hinted that beneath the stone fields of Giza lay an echo of that same horizon, an older chamber, aligned with the path of the sun. Was the elder warning him away or pointing him toward it? The ambiguity gave the words their power. In the Order's halls, men argued over relics and over rites of passage, but seldom did they debate whether the truth itself might be dangerous. Hugo, however, felt the tremor of it. If knowledge could undo the faith of nations, then perhaps silence was the stronger sword. The blind elder had known this, and still he had given the papyrus as though passing a burden rather than a gift. The device on the linen wrapping lingered in Hugo's mind. A circle, a triangle within, simple yet unsettling. In geometry, the circle is eternity, the triangle is the Trinity. Yet placed together they seem to whisper of something else. Union of what should not be joined, or perhaps a mirror of heaven and earth. To the eye of a knight trained in discipline, the symbol was a riddle without answer, a door without key. The desert nights are long. Imagine the quiet as Hugo presses deeper, each step dull on the sand-strewn floor. The walls breathe cold. The torch he dares to light once in a while sputters with resin smoke. Somewhere, a drip of water falls, though no well lies nearby. The papyrus crinkles when he checks it again, as though to remind him, the light beneath the stone has changed us. Was it metaphor? Was it warning? Was it confession? None could say. Later chroniclers would argue whether the papyrus ever existed, or whether it was a forgery whispered into Templar lore by those who envied their power. Some said no such elder could be found in Cairo. Others claimed the name Hugo de Pontois was miscopied, belonging to another knight altogether. The debate remains, as most good mysteries do. Yet the presence of the symbol, the repeated mention of chambers beneath the earth, and the echo of the song appear again and again across scattered testimonies, perhaps invention, perhaps memory. The Order's enemies would later charge them with heresy, accusing them of bowing before strange idols, of murmuring words not of Christ, but of forgotten gods. Could it have been the echo of this papyrus carried through their secret prayers? A document, after all, can seed an idea, and an idea can outlast any fortress. On that night, though, there was no trial, no accusation, only the cool stone beneath Hugo's hand, the breath of silence, the sense that somewhere under the sand a song waited to be heard. Above him the stars wheeled, ancient as the desert. Beneath him the ground seemed to tremble with hidden memory. And around him the silence was not empty, but full as a bell that has been struck, the sound still lingering though no one dares admit to hearing it. In the darkness of that passage, Hugo paused. Some said he prayed, others believed he listened. Whether he found the chamber the papyrus spoke of, no record remains. But the story begins here, with a knight in white and red stepping down into the earth, carrying words that warned and beckoned all at once. The linen-wrapped papyrus rests against his chest, and the night folds over him like a veil. And so the tale opens, not with conquest, not with gold, but with silence, and with a fragile leaf of papyrus that whispered of light beneath the stone. The night air hums, the sand waits, and the passage goes on. From this silence the trail begins to widen. Others would speak of ships diverting course, of supplies unaccounted for, of routes drawn across Sinai that should never have been taken. The traces of a secret movement would soon surface, like faint footprints in the dust, leading deeper into Egypt's shadowed heart. The papyrus had set the knight's path, but documents rarely exist in isolation. For the order of the temple, proof is seldom in a single parchment. Instead, it hides in the quiet details of logistics, in the marginal notes of supply lists, in the whispers of ports where ships unload their cargo by lantern light. To understand why a knight might descend beneath the stones of Giza, one must trace the faint trail of movement that diverged from the expected lines of the Crusades. The official records of the campaigns place the Templars in the Holy Land, guarding routes, building fortresses, escorting pilgrims. Their strongholds rise at Acre, their banners fly near Antioch, their horses water at the wells of Jerusalem. Yet in the ledgers of certain shipmasters there appears a subtle deviation. Vessels bearing the Red Cross are seen not only docking at Jaffa or Tyre, but at Damietta, at Alexandria, far south along the Nile's mouth. These ports, bustling with the cries of merchants and the smell of fish and tar, were not on the sanctioned routes of the crusading armies. And yet the ships came, their holds, not laden with soldiers, but with crates that clinked as if filled with tools, manuscripts, fragments of stone. One ledger, still faintly legible despite centuries of wear, records an unusual notation: horses pressed across Sinai. The desert is no place for horses, not in such numbers, not with the burden of feed and water. Yet the entry stands a terse line, as though the writer himself did not quite understand it. To press horses across Sinai meant an expedition not toward battle, but toward discovery. And it suggests an order from above, sanctioned not by kings, but by the brethren themselves. There are other murmurs. Captives, taken in skirmishes, mention scrolls in the Coptic tongue, seized and carried away by men who bore the white mantles. They describe these men not as eager for ransom, but intent on paper, on ink, on the words of ancient liturgy. In the margins of a captured inventory, alongside spears, mail and iron tools, there appears an almost casual note: manuscript received from the black-clad men of Mizar. Mizar, the name the Arabic tongue gives to Egypt, here marked not as enemy, but as source. Who were these black-clad figures handing over scrolls to foreign knights? Monks, merchants, or something older? An order within an order. Imagine the docks of Damietta under the stars, the Nile swollen with the season's floods, lanterns swinging in the night breeze. A ship rocks gently at berth, its timbers creaking, its sail furled tight. A knight steps down the gangplank, his armour hidden, his face shadowed. From a waiting figure in black robes he receives not gold, not a hostage, but a roll of parchment sealed with a crude knot. The smell is of fish, pitch, and wet rope, but the weight in his hands is heavier than treasure. That moment, recorded only by a scribbled note in a supply book, is enough to bend the course of history. Some scholars dismiss these notations as errors. They argue that scribes often miswrote that horses across Sinai was a confused report of caravan movements, that manuscript from Missa could mean nothing more than a mundane translation bought at a market. Others are less quick to explain away the oddities. When the same pattern emerges across multiple records, ships docking off course, horses pressed into the desert, documents in strange scripts, it forms a constellation. Not proof, perhaps, but a sky full of hints. The silence of the order itself deepens the mystery. The Templars were not careless. Their archives were maintained with precision, yet when the trial of the order came in the early 14th century, many documents were gone, erased, destroyed. What remains are glimpses, references in enemy reports, notes in merchant books, casual remarks in chronicles. And when these fragments are set side by side, a picture begins to form, not of conquest but of pursuit. Pursuit not of land but of knowledge. There is a peculiar rhythm in logistics, one that echoes like the slow tolling of a bell. You can almost hear it: ship, dock, horse, desert, parchment. Each beat, steady, is inevitable. In this rhythm, the deviation is the music itself. The fleet that should have turned north turns south. The caravan that should have stayed on the coast cuts inland. The cargo that should have been salt or spice becomes stone fragments and manuscripts. It is in these small variations that the order's secret path reveals itself. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scene in Alexandria. The great lighthouse still towers, its flame visible for leagues, its stones bright with salt air. The streets bustle with Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, Latin, voices mingling in the market. And in the corner of a dockside tavern, two men lean close. One wears the white mantle, folded discreetly under a cloak. The other, a robe of black, his hands stained with ink. Between them passes a small chest, no larger than a loaf of bread. Inside, perhaps a papyrus like the one Hugo carried, perhaps another map, another warning. The exchange is brief, unnoticed among the noise of the city, but it sets in motion a journey across sand and stone. And so the logistics become evidence, not in grand declarations, but in quiet deviations. The ledger of a shipmaster, the whisper of a captive, the marginalia of an inventory, all align like stars. They suggest that the order's journey into Egypt was not an accident, not a side effect of war, but an intentional detour. And with intention comes meaning. Yet here, too, comes the shadow of doubt. For every scholar who stitches the fragments together, there is another who calls it coincidence. To them, the horses across Sinai are no more than mistranslation. The manuscripts are mere devotional texts exchanged in barter. The routes to Damietta and Alexandria were simple diversions of commerce, not signs of forbidden pursuit. Such voices remind us that history is not certainty, but echo. Still, echoes have power. They linger like the last tone of a bell struck in mist, faint but insistent. And when the same echo is heard from different directions, ports, prisoners, parchment, it is difficult not to believe there was once a sound at its center. For the knight in the passage, for Hugo de Pontois, the papyrus he carried was not isolated. It was the most vivid leaf of a larger pattern, the culmination of quiet decisions made in ports and caravans. Behind him lay the horses that had crossed the sands, the ships that had docked where they should not, the hands in black that had pressed a roll of parchment into his grasp. The papyrus was not accident, it was endpoint, and so the trail of logistics narrows into the passage beneath Giza. The stone grows colder, the silence heavier. Above the night, the stars still turn, and in the ledgers of merchants the notations rest in ink. A path has been cut not by sword, but by supply, and the deeper one follows it, the clearer it becomes that beneath the crusading banners another mission was unfolding. From this quiet movement of ships and scrolls, the path begins to curve toward stone itself, toward walls that bear the marks of foreign hands, toward a circle of ruins that whisper of watchfulness, not war. The journey moves from parchment to place, from written words to carved stone, and the silence deepens. The desert city of Cairo does not yield its secrets easily. Its stones have been built upon and rebuilt so many times that the past lies not in neat layers, but in tangled knots of memory. Yet if one walks carefully through its older quarters, following the whisper of alleys and the turn of shadowed streets, one finds fragments that do not belong to any single age. The Templars, it seems, left traces not in grand monuments but in scattered signs, like faint footprints left in wet earth that hardened under centuries of sun. Behind the venerable church of St. Sergius, a place long revered by the Coptic faithful, there is a wall of stone. To the ordinary eye, it is only masonry, patched and worn, touched by smoke and rain. But pressed faintly into the mortar is the outline of a cross pate, its arms broad and flaring, unmistakable in shape. The stone around it is Egyptian, the style of the wall ancient, yet the cross itself belongs to no native tradition. Was it carved by a knight kneeling in secret prayer, or added later by a hand hoping to claim kinship with the order? The question lingers unanswered, the cross itself weathered but stubborn, as though it insists on being remembered. Not far from there stands a building once known as the Red House. Its walls are thicker than the surrounding dwellings, its windows narrower. And in the upper stories, one finds vertical slits, the kind designed not for light, but for defense, for archers to fire down upon attackers. Yet the style of the slits is not Arabic, nor Byzantine, but Western, akin to those used in Norman castles of the early 13th century. What purpose could such an architecture serve in Cairo, where no Templar fortress was ever officially sanctioned? Perhaps it was not a fortress at all, but an observation post, a station for watchfulness rather than war. The pattern does not end there. On the edge of the old quarter rises the Tower of the Strangers, so named for the foreign hands that raised it. When first examined in the 19th century, tools of unmistakably European form were found buried near its base. A spade of Western iron, a fragment of chainmail, a spur of Norman make. Such relics suggest not just a passing presence, but labour. Knights who worked the stone themselves, who left behind pieces of their armour in the dust. Individually, each of these might be explained away. A pilgrim could have carved a cross, a wealthy merchant might have copied foreign design, a lost spur could have travelled with trade. But when drawn together on a map, these sites form a circle. St. Sergius, the Red House, the Tower of the Strangers, and other minor remnants all mark the perimeter of an area that encloses the necropolis and the ancient well of Serab. To see the pattern is to feel the faint tightening of a noose, not around the living but around memory itself. And there is more. The Serab well itself is mentioned in Coptic chronicles of the 14th century. They speak of men clothed in white, who gathered near its waters at night, chanting in a tongue not known to the scribes. The chroniclers describe the sound as neither Greek nor Latin, nor the familiar cadences of Arabic prayer. It was something in between, something unsettling, like a song half remembered from a dream. The villagers, unnerved, stayed away. And so the well became known as a place of whispering. The circle, when studied closely, also aligns with the sky. Certain doorways, certain windows, face not toward the street, but toward the heavens. On the day of the summer solstice, the sun pours directly through a slit in the red house, striking the floor with uncanny precision. Another opening in the Tower of the Strangers frames the setting sun on the same evening. Coincidence, perhaps, yet too many coincidences form their own argument. Was this circle of structures a defensive ring, or was it instead a great dial, a calendar of stone, a way to mark time's passage in silence? To stand there, even now, is to feel the echo. The alley is warm with dust, the air smells of spice and sweat, yet when the sun lowers, the stones seem to hum with a memory not their own. You can almost imagine the white-mantled figures standing watch at each point of the circle, silent, their faces shadowed by helmets. They are not preparing for battle. They are waiting, listening, perhaps for the song that the papyrus warned against, perhaps for the light beneath the stone. Some scholars call this interpretation fanciful. They argue that crosses can be carved by anyone, that vertical slits are not exclusively European, that tools travel far in the hands of merchants. They remind us that Cairo was a crossroads, a place where artifacts of many worlds collided. And they are not wrong. History, like the city itself, is tangled, but still the circle persists, stubborn in its geometry, whispering through alignment and repetition. It is the geometry that gives pause, gives. A fortress is built to hold against attack, its walls thick and clustered. This circle of scattered sites does not defend, it delineates. It marks like stones around a sacred grove, like posts set to enclose a ritual ground. When the solstice sun pierces both slit and tower, one cannot help but wonder if these structures were meant not for men at all, but for the heavens. Imagine for a moment the hush of midsummer evening. The streets quiet, the shadows long, the last heat bleeding from the day. In the red house, the narrow slit darkens, then glows, a blade of light cutting the gloom. At the tower, another beam meets it, as if the sky itself were marking a circle on the earth. Somewhere in the center, near the necropolis, the well waits, silent, holding its own darkness. And perhaps, just perhaps, the knights stood there in silence, measuring time, not with clocks but with the sun itself, waiting for a sign beneath the stone. Whether the structures were truly Templar is debated still, yet the persistence of the pattern, the cross, the spur, the solstice, suggests a design greater than chance. And the design, like a bell struck long ago, still resonates faintly. To walk those streets today is to step within a memory, to feel that the air itself is listening. The circle holds, its stones are worn, its symbols faint, its stories debated. Yet it encloses a mystery, one that neither history nor time has dissolved. Beneath the arguments of scholars, beneath the dust of centuries, the silence of the circle remains, and in that silence the echo of the papyrus returns. The light beneath the stone has changed us. From this circle of stone and shadow, the trail begins to spiral deeper. The pattern does not end at walls and towers. It leads further underground into chambers where maps are carved on domed ceilings, where strange Latin inscriptions whisper of circles unbroken. The ruins are not only on the surface, they descend like a spiral into the vaults of the earth. Beneath the shifting sands of Cairo's western edge, past alleys where donkeys bray and markets stir, lies a story of stone that has troubled historians for more than a century. It comes not from a knight's chronicle or a papal record, but from the testimony of a 19th century traveller, a man named Charles Halley, who swore in 1851 that he had been led to a chamber unlike any other. His letter survives, faded and foxed, written in a neat, deliberate hand. It describes not treasure, not bones, but a vault carved with patterns that seem to belong more to cartography than to worship. The chamber he described was a low hall, its ceiling arched into a vault of brick, damp with the smell of earth and salt. Across the walls were incised lines, delicate but deliberate, stretching in curves that reminded him of coastlines, as though the chamber itself were a map. Beside these lines in sober Latin was the phrase de lapide ad arenam, circulus tenet, from stone to sand the circle holds. The words seemed both riddle and reassurance, a declaration that what began in rock would persist even when buried in desert. At the center of the chamber rose a pillar, 8-sided, its surface spiraled with grooves, as if once fitted with inlays of metal. At its base, half worn by damp, lay a cross pate, unmistakable in form. Halley, no stranger to the symbols of Europe, recognized it at once, though he confessed it seemed out of place beneath the Egyptian earth. More curious still, when fragments of stone from the chamber were later tested, they did not match the quarries of the Nile. Instead, they bore the signature of limestone from southern France, hundreds of leagues away. To imagine such stone transported across seas, across deserts, is to imagine a purpose beyond common labor. Halley was not the only one to report such things. A German nobleman, travelling decades later, wrote of a Christian chamber beneath the Nile's western bank, its walls covered with scratches that resembled maps, its floor etched with strange circles. In his account, he mentions finding a knight kneeling in prayer there, though whether this was vision, memory, or invention remains uncertain. Other memoirs, fragmentary and half-believed, speak of chambers where Europeans gathered underground, whispering prayers not heard in the streets above. If we pause and step into that chamber, as Halley claimed he did, the air grows close, heavy with the scent of brick dust and damp stone. Your footsteps echo, caught in the vault. The pillar stands in the center, its grooves empty but suggestive, like a musical instrument without strings. Run your fingers over the spiral, and you feel the memory of something once attached, perhaps copper plates, perhaps discs that could turn in rhythm. The cross at its base lies quiet, worn to a shallow shadow, but its shape is still clear. Around you the walls curve, lines tracing arcs that might be rivers, might be shores, or might be something altogether more symbolic. Some argue the chamber is invention, a story spun by travelers eager to weave themselves into the romance of Egypt. They note that Halley was a man of letters, not a trained archaeologist, and that his descriptions lack measurements or sketches that might confirm the claim. Others reply that Halley had no reason to fabricate such detail, and that the later accounts corroborate at least part of his vision. The truth sits between silence and echo, impossible to seize, but difficult to dismiss. The inscription itself, from stone to sand the circle holds, has sparked debate. Was it a reassurance to those who built the chamber that their order would endure even as empires crumbled? Or was it a warning that whatever was guarded, there must remain within the circle, never broken, never revealed? The words resonate like the toll of a distant bell, heard faintly through mist. Ambiguous, unsettling, compelling. And then there is the stone. Southern French limestone, identified by its unique blend of fossil traces, does not appear naturally in Egypt. To find it in fragments of the chamber suggests either deliberate importation or later modification. If imported, then who carried it? The Templars, whose strongholds in Languedoc and Provence would have had easy access to such stone, stand as the most plausible. Yet skeptics argue the samples could have been contaminated, mislabeled, or even planted. The debate continues, a quarrel of scholars across decades, each voice another layer of echo. But let us imagine the simpler truth, that knights once built here, shaping a chamber not for arms, not for wealth, but for knowledge. A map chamber where coastlines and rivers could be traced, where alignments of sun and star could be marked, where the world itself might be charted. The pillar at its center, spiraled and inlaid, may have served as a gnomon, a tool of measurement. The grooves, catching light or shadow, could have turned the chamber into a silent instrument, recording the heavens upon its walls. If so, then the chamber was less a fortress than an observatory, hidden not above ground where all could see, but below, where silence reigned. To stand there in the cool dimness would be to feel the hush of centuries pressing in, the awareness that stone can hold memory more surely than parchment. The cross at the base of the pillar, worn but unyielding, would remind the brethren that their faith guided their search, even as their tools measured the stars. Picture, if you will, a gathering there. Knights kneeling, their mail creaking softly, their voices hushed in prayer. Beside them, perhaps a Coptic priest, robed in black, whispering passages in a tongue not theirs. The air flickers with torchlight, the grooves of the pillar gleam faintly, and on the wall the carved lines glow with shadow, the map of a world both known and unknown. They are not plotting battles, they are plotting silence, deciding what must be hidden, what must never surface. Skeptics will say the chamber never existed, that Halley's words are the fancy of a romantic traveller, that no stone has ever been proven, no pillar confirmed. But even if the chamber were invention, the persistence of the tale itself becomes evidence. For why should such a story endure, retold across generations, unless it touched some nerve of memory? History thrives on persistence, on the survival of whispers. And so the vaulted map chamber stands in imagination, if not in stone. Its lines, like coastlines traced in dust, invite interpretation. Its pillar, spiraled and silent, beckons the curious to listen for a song that may never have been played. Its inscription, spare and haunting, reminds us that circles endure, even when empires fade. Above the chamber, the city continues, markets bustling, minarets rising, bells and calls mingling in the air. But beneath, if Halley's words are to be believed, lies a silence, marked by maps, a vault where stone itself was taught to remember. And whether or not the chamber can be found, the idea of it remains, shaping the story of the order as surely as any fortress or battle. From this underground vault, the trail spirals outward once again into the wider world of politics and power. For not all secrets remain hidden in stone. Some are bargained for, exchanged between foes who recognize their weight. And in the uneasy truce between cross and crescent, whispers tell of a pact, a gift of depth offered in silence, that drew the Templars ever deeper beneath Egypt's sands. The papyrus had warned it. He who opens the chamber will not survive the song. To some it was the melodrama of a curse, a phrase meant to frighten intruders. Yet to those who linger in the echo of such words, it begins to feel more like an observation than a threat. For the chambers beneath the pyramids and the ruins near Cairo are not empty. They are tuned, they hum. Travelers in later centuries, wandering through collapsed tunnels and hollowed halls, describe sensations difficult to explain, a low vibration, as if the very stone were alive with sound. When a voice was raised, even in a whisper, the chamber did not echo in the normal way. Instead, it seemed to swell, to hold the note like a vast organ pipe, until the body itself vibrated with it. Some faint-hearted men fled, convinced the stones were bewitched. Others stayed and listened, their ears ringing long after the silence had returned. Science would later discover that some of these chambers resonate at specific frequencies. A tone struck in them grows louder, fuller, until it feels as though the air itself has weight. In the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, for example, the granite walls answer with a deep note when sound is introduced. Musicians who tested it found certain pitches were magnified, sustained, woven into the body of the chamber. It is easy to imagine then what the papyrus meant by its warning. The song was real, and those who dared hear it might not emerge unchanged. For the Templars, trained in discipline, bound by silence, such resonance could have seemed divine or dangerous. Picture Hugo de Pontois stepping deeper into a hollow cut in stone, the torch in his hand sputtering. He clears his throat, perhaps mutters a prayer, and the chamber answers. The note carries beyond his control, grows, fills the air until it seems to tremble in his chest. His heart beats against it. His bones vibrate with it. And in that moment, he knows the meaning of the elder's words. Not survive the song. You can place yourself there. Imagine the stone cool against your fingertips, the torch casting wavering light. You whisper, perhaps only to test the silence, and instead of silence, the air answers. A deep hum rises, invisible but present, wrapping around you like the toll of a bell hidden within the walls. The longer you stand, the more your body sways with it, your breath caught in its rhythm. It is not curse, not magic, but sound, yet sound that feels alive. The papyrus ended with a sentence both chilling and alluring. The light beneath the stone has changed us. What? In some chambers, narrow shafts pierce the walls, aligning with the sun on solstice days. When the shaft fills with sun, the beam falls into the darkness, striking granite. The glow, faint and golden, seems to ignite the stone itself. If a song fills the air at the same moment, the effect is overwhelming. Light and sound mingling in subterranean silence, a ritual not of blood or fire, but of resonance and reflection. Perhaps the warning was not against death, but against transformation. To survive the song might mean to remain as one was. To be changed, however, was to step into something else entirely. Did the Templars undergo such a transformation? Some later rumors claimed they gathered at night to chant in tongues unknown, to hum notes that shook their bodies, to embrace silence not as absence, but as presence. Their enemies called it heresy. Yet to those who experienced it, it may have been revelation. Medieval Europe was not without its awareness of acoustics. Gregorian chant relied on resonance. Monastic cloisters were designed to amplify voice. But in Egypt, the resonance was older, stranger, deeper. It was as if the ancients had cut stone not merely for burial, but for sound itself. For music, no instrument could play. For songs, only walls could hold. To step into such a chamber was to become instrument and listener all at once. Skeptics dismiss these accounts as exaggerations, the fancies of travelers dazzled by the grandeur of the pyramids. They point out that resonance exists in many large halls, not just in Egypt, and that the notion of a deadly song is nothing more than myth. Yet the persistence of the phrase "the song" in multiple documents suggests more than fancy. It suggests experience, repeated and remembered. Whether one views it as curse, science, or ritual, the effect was real enough to be feared. Imagine the Templars gathered in such a space, their armor ringing faintly as they knelt. A low hum begins, perhaps from a single voice, perhaps from the walls themselves. It swells, filling the chamber, until each knight feels it pressing against his ribs, vibrating in his skull. Torches flicker as the air quivers, eyes close. In that moment, silence and sound become indistinguishable, the mind itself lulled into trance. They are warriors, yes, but here they are also witnesses, listeners to something older than their creed. For Hugo, the papyrus had spoken truth. The light beneath the stone could indeed change a man. Whether it was holy, unholy, or simply unknown, mattered less than the fact that it was real. To experience the resonance was to step into another state, a thin veil between waking and dream. Perhaps that was why the chroniclers accused the order of strange practices. Perhaps it was not worship of idols, but surrender to the song, a practice no outsider could understand. The warning lingers still. He who opens the chamber will not survive the song. It echoes not as threat, but as certainty. To enter is to change, and to change is to die to what you were. In that sense, survival is impossible. Above the chamber, the desert night is still. Stars wheel silently, the pyramids cast long shadows. But beneath, the song continues, invisible, inaudible unless awakened. Those who know of it guard the silence, for to speak is to break it, and to break it is to invite the song again. The story of the Templars in Egypt, then, is not of conquest but of resonance, of men who listened to stone and found themselves altered. It is a tale not of swords clashing but of walls singing. And in that song lies the reason for silence, for secrecy, perhaps even for destruction. For how could any power, papal or royal, allow such a truth to remain unbound? As Act 1 closes, the echoes soften. The night lingers in the chamber, the hum fading, the torch dimming. Above, life goes on, oblivious. Below, silence waits, full and patient. And here, at this threshold, we pause as well. If you have felt the hum of these words, the resonance of this slow descent into stone, consider staying with us. Subscribe, so the silence may continue, so the song may not be lost. Together we let the secret breathe, not in noise but in quiet, in the gentle toll of stories that refuse to fade. From here, the tale will rise again, into negotiations and pacts, into graffiti scratched on high stones, into signs that the silence was not confined underground, but spread into politics and prayer. The story deepens, but for now we leave Hugo in the hush, listening, transformed by the sound beneath the stone. High above the king's chamber, in narrow cavities cut to relieve the weight of stone, lie marks that few eyes have seen. These relieving chambers, as they are called, were meant for structure, not for visitors. Their ceilings press with blocks weighing tons, stacked in silent strength above the pharaoh's hall. When European explorers forced their way upward in the early 19th century, squeezing through shafts that smelled of dust and ancient air, they found not only granite, but paint, red and black, scrawled on surfaces meant never to be exposed. Most of the marks were workmen's signs, names of gangs who hauled the stones, tallies of labor. Yet among them, if the old reports are to be trusted, there appeared something stranger, the cross pate. Broad arms flaring, the same emblem carried on the mantles of Templar knights. It lay not on a rough quarry face, but upon a smooth surface, high and hidden, as if painted with care. To some, it was proof the order had reached here, leaving a sign for brethren who might climb the same shaft centuries later. To others, it was vandalism by later hands, a forgery meant to dazzle credulous travellers. The German Egyptologist Carl Richard Lepsius, in his notebooks from the 1840s, sketched some of these markings. His drawings show hieroglyphs, quarry marks, but also a flaring cross tucked among them. Later, when some of the inscriptions were damaged, scraped away by those seeking relics, only Lepsius's pages preserved their memory. His handwriting notes cryptically, "Sign of the Brotherhood in the hollow of stone." Whether he meant the labor gangs or something more esoteric is unclear, and scholars argue still. Imagine the scene. You crawl through a passage no wider than your shoulders, granite pressing close. The air is dry, sharp with dust. Your torch flickers, soot curling upward into the cramped darkness. Then on the wall you see red paint, not hieroglyphs, not cartouches, but a cross you know from Crusader shields. Your breath catches. In this narrow silence, the symbol seems to glow, as if lit by more than firelight. Elsewhere, in a smaller pyramid, explorers noted inscriptions blending Latin characters with what resembled early Coptic script. The translation, uncertain and debated, rendered something like "Lux sub est," the light is beneath. The phrase recalls the papyrus of Hugo de Pontois, recalls the elder's warning, recalls the motif whispered again and again, light under stone. Was it coincidence? Was it the imagination of scholars too eager to connect dots? Or was it a deliberate trail left for those who would understand? Some researchers suggest the Templars, if indeed they ventured here, marked their way for secrecy rather than display. The crosses were not boasts, but signals. We have been here, we have found. Such markings would be invisible to the public, visible only to those who risked the suffocating climb. They were whispers in paint, hidden in the stone's lungs. Skeptics push back. They remind us that many travelers of the 19th century embellished their finds to attract patronage. A cross pate could be drawn after the fact, added by a mischievous guide or by the traveller himself. They note that no other archaeological evidence confirms a medieval European presence in those chambers. To them, the story of Templar graffiti is fantasy grafted onto authentic Egyptian stone. Yet the persistence of the story matters. Again and again, in scattered notebooks and half-forgotten journals, the phrase reappears. Crosses painted where no one should have painted, inscriptions whispering of light beneath. Even if each claim stands uncertain, together they form the pattern of echo, that same constellation of fragments seen in the logistics, the ruins, the papyrus. And one must ask, if forgeries, why forge them here? Why not in open chambers where more eyes could be persuaded? To leave a mark in a hidden cavity is to risk obscurity. It is to write not for fame but for recognition by a very few. That logic itself makes the mark suspect and compelling all at once. Close your eyes and feel the chamber around you. The granite radiates coolness, the air is tight, the torchlight dim. The walls are silent, yet the faint trace of pigment lingers. Touch it, and your finger comes away with nothing. The centuries have bitten deep. but your mind holds the shape, a cross, flaring wide, a reminder of mantles white and red. Above, the weight of millions of stones presses down, yet here, in the hidden hollow, lies a fragile mark, delicate as breath. Later chroniclers connected these signs to the accusations at the Templars' trial. They were said to worship strange images, to perform rituals in darkness, to bow not before Christ, but before symbols unknown. Could it have been the echo of this? A brotherhood kneeling in hidden chambers, listening to resonance, marking crosses when no priest could see? The charges may have been twisted, exaggerated, but behind them perhaps lay whispers of truth. Debate continues, voices rising and falling like chants. Some argue the graffiti was nothing but quarry marks misunderstood. Others hold that the Templars in their wanderings left signals that only silence could preserve. Between these positions lies the fertile ground of story, where uncertainty itself becomes the music of the past. And so the graffiti, faint and disputed, joins the pattern. From papyrus to ruins, from vaults to paint, the trail winds deeper. Each fragment is fragile, yet together they insist. Together they whisper that beneath the pyramids lies not only stone, but memory, not only silence, but song. Above ground, Cairo bustles, merchants call, donkeys bray, bells toll. Beneath, the chambers breathe quietly, their walls holding pigment and echo. The debate may never resolve, but perhaps resolution is not the point. Perhaps the point is that the silence itself holds the truth, just as the inscription claimed, "The light is beneath." From here, the story does not stay hidden in shafts. It rises into the realm of politics, of truce and pact, where even enemies find use in silence. For when Saladin, the great Sultan, faced his Christian foes, there were rumors of a gift, one not of gold but of depth. The chronicles of the Crusades tell of Saladin with the grandeur of legend. He was the Sultan who faced the armies of Europe and bent them back, a warrior whose name carried both fear and admiration across the Mediterranean. His battles are remembered, his victories sung. Yet in the quieter folds of history, in lines of ink barely noticed, there are hints of something stranger. A pact made not in the light of day, but in the silence of stone. It is spoken of as the Southern Pact, a gift not of land or treasure, but of depth. In certain fragments of correspondence written in the cramped hands of Arab clerks, there are references to a permission granted, a concession unlike any other. The wording is elusive, a passage beneath newly opened ground, a gift to the brothers, so long as they remain silent. What gift could Saladin have offered his sworn enemies? What ground could be so precious that even warriors would lay aside swords to enter it? The answer, repeated in whispers, is that the Sultan allowed the knights access to a chamber near Giza, a chamber recently uncovered by flood or quake, a chamber no man had entered in centuries. The evidence is circumstantial, yet suggestive. Along the Nile Delta lie the foundations of fortresses never completed. Their walls rise only to the height of a man, their corners marked but never crowned. They are built not with the broad walls of defense, but with the narrow vaults of storage. Scholars examining them note their curious form. Sunken chambers, half-filled, resembling not castles, but repositories. What were they meant to hold? Not grain, not weapons. Their form suggests scrolls, tablets, chests, meant to sleep underground. Then, as suddenly as they were begun, they were abandoned. The pattern matches too neatly with the stories of a pact. The knights granted entry perhaps needed staging grounds. They began their work, then left it, as though their purpose had been fulfilled and secrecy demanded silence. Picture the scene in imagination. A caravan approaches the delta under cover of night. The moon drapes the reeds in silver. The river murmurs against its banks. Carts are covered in canvas, their contents hidden. Men in white mantles move quietly, the crimson crosses on their cloaks dim in shadow. They unload not weapons, but sealed chests carried into half-built vaults. The air smells of water and clay, the frogs sing in the marshes, and above all hangs the heavy silence of purpose. Then the walls are left unfinished, the site abandoned, the ground reclaiming what was started. Later inquisitors, centuries removed, heard echoes of this. In the long interrogations of the Templar trials, men under pressure spoke of a covenant of the South, of permissions bought with silence. They mentioned no names, offered no detail, yet the phrase appears again and again. Some scholars dismiss it as invention under duress, words forced from frightened men. Others suggest the consistency is too strong to be coincidence, that something real lay behind their faltering speech. You can almost feel the tension of such an agreement. Saladin, magnanimous yet shrewd, might see advantage in allowing foreign knights into hidden chambers, provided they swore silence. The Templars, seekers of knowledge as much as soldiers, would accept. What passed between them, what was found beneath the sand, was never written openly. Yet the traces remain in stone and word, unfinished walls, covered carts, confessions whispered under trial. Skeptics rightly caution that the story is tenuous. They note that half-built fortresses are not unusual in times of shifting war, that construction often ceased when funds or manpower failed. They argue that inquisitors' records are poor evidence, filled with exaggeration and invention. And yet the skeptic's logic cannot silence the resonance of pattern. When fortresses align with confessions, when confessions align with phrases in Arabic margins, the echo grows louder. It is the phrase itself, the gift of depth, that unsettles. Gifts are usually gold, land, power. Depth is no ordinary gift. Depth is silence, darkness, the beneath. It suggests a chamber, an opening, a place not above, but below. To call it a gift is to imply that access itself was treasure enough. Imagine again the exchange. No banners, no trumpets. In a quiet tent by the Nile, a sultan in flowing robes, a knight in white and red. Between them lies no map of conquests, but a parchment folded twice. Saladin gestures, a hand sweeping toward the desert. The knight nods, understanding that the gift is not in words, but in permission. Outside, the river flows as it always has. Inside, two enemies share silence, their pact deeper than any fortress wall. Centuries later, those who looked back at the Order's downfall would wonder, why such ruthless suppression? Why such hunger to erase their memory? Some argue it was gold, some say it was power, but others suggest it was knowledge, the kind that cannot be paraded, the kind only silence can guard. If the knights entered a chamber gifted by Saladin, and if what they found there could not be spoken of, then perhaps the silence of their destruction was the continuation of that pact. In the cool night of Cairo, when the bells of distant churches mingle with the call of the muezzin, the story lingers. Above, life flows, markets hum, swords clash. But below, there is only depth, a gift traded in silence, a pact remembered only in fragments. The Southern Pact remains debated, elusive, uncertain. Perhaps it never existed. Perhaps it was only the invention of men desperate under trial. Yet the thought persists, humming like a note too low to hear, but felt in the bones. The gift of depth, the permission to enter, the silence kept. And from that silence the story shifts again, from pacts of politics to traces carved directly into stone. For in the highest chambers of pyramids where paint lingers on granite, and in the darkest passages where inscriptions whisper the light is beneath, we find graffiti, marks of presence, left like shadows on the stone. Around the edges of Cairo's necropolis, where the city frays into desert and the air grows still with dust, stand ruins that puzzle the eye. They are not large, not grand. Their stones are modest, their walls no higher than a man's reach. And yet, when studied closely, they reveal a secret geometry. They do not stand as fortresses, for their walls are too thin to resist an army, their courtyards too narrow to muster troops. Instead, they seem to watch, they seem to wait. One such structure leans against the horizon like a forgotten tooth, its doorway facing not the street, but the sky. Another crouches low, its single window cut not to the east, not to the west, but to the exact point where the midsummer sun sinks. At first glance they appear as little more than crumbling stone, shelters for stray dogs and drifting sand. But with patience, the pattern emerges. Their positions and apertures align not with roads or defences, but with celestial events, the solstice, the turning of the year, the rhythm of the heavens. Travellers of the 19th century who mapped these places noted the alignments with care. They found that at sunset on the summer solstice, the last beam of light poured directly through a slit in one ruin, striking a smooth slab at the back wall. Another ruin across the necropolis mirrored the effect, its narrow opening framing the same sun at the same hour. It was as though the builders had set markers, stones tuned not to war, but to the sky's procession. The chronicles of local Coptic scribes mention something stranger still. They tell of figures in white mantles who appeared around these structures on certain nights, silent, carrying no banners, uttering no prayers that could be understood. The villagers described them as watchers, men who stood unmoving while the moon climbed, while the stars shifted overhead. Some called them spirits, others pilgrims. The records leave the impression of ritual, though one shrouded in secrecy. Imagine standing there as the sun sets on the longest day. The air is heavy with heat, the ground still warm beneath your feet. The ruin is quiet, its stones cracked but patient. Then, as the sun dips, a blade of light slips through the narrow slit, sharp as a drawn sword, cutting the darkness within. It strikes the stone at the far wall, glowing like an ember. The chamber hums with warmth, not in sound, but in sensation. You feel as though the ruin itself has inhaled, as though the stone has remembered something. Some argue these alignments are coincidence. A wall will face somewhere, a slit will catch some sun. To build significance upon chance, they say, is to weave dreams from dust. Others, however, see too many correspondences. When multiple structures align with solstice points, when their apertures trace the same celestial rhythm, the coincidence feels deliberate. The ruins may not defend, but they mark. They keep time not for soldiers, but for silence. The phrase "points of silence" has been used by some modern historians to describe them. The term suggests not emptiness, but presence. Silence is not absence here, it is function. To stand within these stones on the solstice is to be enveloped in quiet precision, the light marking the wall, the sky marking the time, the earth holding its breath. It is easy to imagine the Templars, or those they worked alongside, using these markers not for war, but for waiting, for watching. In one ruin, carved faintly into a lintel stone, an inscription resembling a lunar calendar was found. The marks were crude, worn, but appeared to follow the phases of the moon. A later observer, more poet than scientist, described it as a stone diary of the heavens, scratched by hands that counted not days of labor, but nights of light. This calendar, though fragmentary, deepens the impression that the ruins were not mundane dwellings, but observatories of a kind, sanctuaries of silence where sky and stone conversed. Skeptics counter that medieval Europe had no need to build such markers in Cairo, that the knowledge of solstice was already common, that these ruins could as easily be watchtowers or way stations. Yet the alignment, the inscriptions, the chronicles of white-clad figures chanting in strange tongues, all converge. And convergence, even in fragments, hums with resonance. If the Templars did use these structures, what were they waiting for? Perhaps not conquest, but confirmation. Perhaps the papyrus of Hugo de Pontois, with its talk of the House of the Horizon, had led them to expect a sign in the sky. And so they built or repurposed these small stations, tuning them to solstice, waiting for light to fall where stone marked its passage. It was less fortress than ritual ground, less garrison than observatory. The desert lends itself to such waiting. Nights are long, stars burn sharp, silence deepens until even the shifting of sand seems loud. To keep vigil here is to feel the rhythm of time differently, to sense the great wheel turning above and beneath. The Templars, disciplined in patience, would have found in this silence a mirror of their own vows. To stand watch as the sun aligned, as the moon traced its path, was to join themselves to a rhythm older than faith itself. Some chroniclers later accused them of blending faiths, of borrowing from Egyptian rites, of mingling Christian crosses with pagan symbols. If the ruins indeed served as observatories, perhaps those accusations were not wholly false. To watch the solstice with reverence is to share in rituals far older than the church, rituals carved into the stone of Heliopolis, sung in hymns to Ra and Osiris. The Templars may have seen in these acts not heresy but harmony, a uniting of heavens and earth beneath one God. Their enemies saw only corruption. Picture again the sunset, the ruin, the beam of light. Around the ruin, the desert hums. Cicadas buzz. The call to prayer drifts faintly from the city, mingling with the rustle of dry grass. Inside the chamber, silence reigns, heavy but not empty. It is a silence filled with meaning, a silence chosen, a silence marked by light. The point of silence becomes a place of presence, and in that presence one hears the echo of the papyrus, the echo of the graffiti, the echo of the pact. The light is beneath. Thus the ruins form part of the larger circle, not of stone alone, but of intention. They are stations of patience, stations of silence, where men in white waited for the heavens to confirm what papyrus and whisper had already told. They did not shout their purpose. They marked it in alignment, in shadow, in the gentle stroke of sun on stone. From these points of silence, the story turns once more to documents, to codices where phases of the moon are drawn beside strange symbols, to manuscripts where the cross entwines with the Ankh, where silence is married to song. For above the ruins of Cairo, another text survives, the Lunaria Codex, speaking of nights when the goddess sings to stone under the full moon. Among the scattered manuscripts attributed to the order, one text emerges like a silver thread glinting faintly in moonlight, the so-called Lunaria Codex. Its provenance is uncertain. Some claim it was first noted in a monastery library in Portugal, others that it travelled from a Coptic scriptorium near Heliopolis. Wherever its origin, The codex contains a curious calendar, not of feast days or saints, but of lunar phases. The vellum is browned with age, its ink faded, yet the marks are clear enough: crescents, half-moons, circles full and luminous. Alongside these drawings run notations in Latin, sparse and almost poetic. One line, repeated more than once, reads, "Luna canit cum lapide, plenus orbis." The moon sings with the stone when the circle is full. To find such a phrase in a text linked to the Templars is arresting. Their official rule was rigid, their prayers stern, their rituals martial. Yet here is something different. Something softer, more like an echo from ancient Egypt than a command from Christendom. For in Heliopolis, long before Crusaders dreamed of Jerusalem, priests had watched the moon, timing their rites by its waxing and waning. To them, the moon was not merely a lamp in the night, but a rhythm of the gods. Its glow marked when to chant, when to build, when to mourn. The codex goes further. In its margins appear sketches of symbols, the cross-pate entwined with the Ankh, the ancient sign of life. The lines are clumsy but deliberate. The Ankh's loop rests upon the cross's intersection, as though the two had been married into one. No known liturgy of Christendom employs such a fusion. Yet here it is, drawn in the same hand that marked the phases of the moon. Scholars who have examined reproductions argue over its meaning. Some call it syncretism, the blending of faiths. Others see it as shorthand, a code meant only for insiders. Still others suspect forgery. Yet even forgery, they admit, tells of the fascination that union inspired. Imagine the codex open on a wooden table, candlelight trembling across the vellum. The room is quiet, monks asleep, the scribe alone. He traces the crescent moon with his quill, then adds the symbol of the cross, then, almost shyly, the loop of the Ankh. The ink glistens. Outside, the night is heavy, the desert air cool, and the moon itself rides high, watching. In that moment, the scribe may have felt he was not inventing, but remembering, reaching back to a time when stone and sky sang together. The phrase "the goddess sings with the stone when the moon is full" ties the codex to older traditions. Egyptian hymns speak of Isis as the moon's mistress, of Hathor as dancer of the heavens, of voices raised when the orb reached fullness. To those steeped in Latin prayer, to weave such language into their codex was daring, even dangerous. And yet, perhaps to the Knights, it was not blasphemy, but completion. To combine cross and Ankh was to say that life eternal and salvation were not enemies, but mirrors. To write of the moon singing with stone was to suggest that the divine could be measured not only in scripture, but in sky. Some modern readers recoil at the suggestion. They remind us that the Templars were condemned precisely for such blending, accused of idolatry and heresy. They argue that the codex, if real, must have been penned by sympathizers later, not by the knights themselves. Others counter that the order was not monolithic, that in far-flung corners amidst the deserts of Egypt, there may have been brothers who experimented, who sought God not only in chapels, but in chambers of resonance and beams of light. If one accepts the codex as authentic, it fits neatly into the larger pattern. The papyrus of Hugo de Pontois spoke of the house of the horizon. The ruins around the necropolis aligned with the solstice. The graffiti whispered that light was beneath the stone. Now the codex marks the phases of the moon, joining earth and sky, cross and Ankh. Each fragment by itself is fragile, but together they form a chain of intention. The imagery of the Ankh and cross entwined has lingered beyond scholarship. In Tomar, in Portugal, there is said to be a relief showing a boy holding both. In esoteric societies of later centuries, similar symbols surface as though the memory refused to vanish. To some, the Ankh cross is heresy, to others, it is harmony. The debate itself proves the symbol's power. Picture, if you will, the knights gathered beneath a moonlit sky near Heliopolis. Their armor is set aside, their mantles whitened by the glow. A table of stone lies before them, upon it a carved cross and an Ankh side by side. They stand silent until the moon is full, and then a chant begins, not loud, not martial, but low and resonant, weaving with the hum of the stones around them. The phrase from the Codex lingers in the air. The moon sings with the stone when the circle is full. In that silence, they feel the resonance that unites heaven and earth. Critics remind us that no such ritual can be proven. The Codex may be misattributed, the drawings misinterpreted. Perhaps the Ankh was copied absent-mindedly from a Coptic margin. Perhaps the lunar phases were no more than agricultural notes. Yet even critics admit that the symbolism cannot be ignored. The cross and Ankh together speak of a desire to reconcile, to see beyond boundaries. Whether penned by knight, monk, or forger, the idea itself becomes part of the order's story. The moon has always lent itself to mystery. Its phases suggest cycles, its glow hints at hidden influence. To link it with stone, to claim it sings with granite when full, is to acknowledge resonance, vibration, song. Modern science tells us that certain stones do resonate when struck, that sound can linger in chambers tuned by architecture. Perhaps the Codex records not mere poetry, but experience. Perhaps those who stood within the ruins on a moonlit night heard something the rest of the world has forgotten. And so the Lunaria Codex joins the chorus of fragments. It does not shout its meaning, it hums quietly like a note beneath breath. It draws together symbol and sky, ink and stone, cross and Ankh. Its pages remind us that history is not always linear, that it spirals, folding one faith into another, weaving light and shadow, silence and song. Above, the moon still rides the heavens. Below, the stones of Cairo still hold their silence. Between them, in vellum browned with age, whispers survive. The goddess sings with the stone when the moon is full. From this codex, the path of the story rises toward a vivid scene, a ritual in Heliopolis itself, where knights and priests of different worlds stood side by side, kneeling before a symbol that merged sun and moon, cross and Ankh. There, the blending of traditions becomes not only ink on vellum, but flesh and breath, men bowing in silence beneath the silver light. Heliopolis, the city of the sun, had long since faded into ruins by the time the Templars wandered its shadowed outskirts. The obelisks that once glowed with dawn still stood like frozen flames, their hieroglyphs whispering of Ra's power. But the grand temples were broken, their courtyards half buried in sand. Yet even in ruin, Heliopolis retained a gravity. Travelers wrote of the uncanny stillness there, of a silence so dense it seemed to pulse like a hidden heartbeat. For centuries, Coptic priests tended small chapels in its shadow, preserving fragments of memory. And in their records lies a story. Men clad in white mantles, faces shadowed, who stood beside the local priests during a ritual of the moon. The account is terse, no more than a handful of lines. It describes visitors in white who bowed as the orb rose, and notes that their garments bore a sign like the cross, but wider at its arms. The Coptic chronicler, puzzled, wondered aloud whether these were foreign monks or soldiers disguised. He noted that one knelt beside an Egyptian priest as chants rose, and together they touched their foreheads to the same stone altar. The image is startling. A Templar knight, armored and disciplined, bowing in rhythm with a Coptic celebrant before a symbol that mingled cross and crescent, sun and moon. Imagine the night. The desert cools as the day's heat slips away. A full moon climbs, pouring silver light across the broken pylons. The air smells of dust and distant jasmine. A small group gathers in a ruined courtyard, their figures pale against the stones. A priest in black raises his arms, intoning syllables half Coptic, half forgotten. And beside him, a knight in white kneels, his gauntlets removed, his hands bare against the stone. The chant flows in a strange rhythm, 3 beats, 3 beats, 2, like the march of soldiers, yet softened into song. The sound echoes in the ruin, mingling with the hum of the stones themselves. One carving, noted by a later traveller, depicts a mounted knight kneeling before a priest who holds not a cross, but a disc framed in a crescent. The figure of the knight is clumsy, but unmistakably Western, his helmet angular, his sword at his side. The priest's figure is older, stylized, his arms lifted to the moon. Between them hovers the hybrid symbol, a cross whose arms widen into the arc of a crescent, its center looped like an Ankh. The carving, if authentic, suggests not conquest, but communion, a moment where traditions met and blended, where silence carried them both. The chant described by the chronicler has puzzled musicologists. The notation of 332 echoes in medieval marches, yet also in ancient Egyptian hymns. Such a rhythm, balanced yet uneven, creates a sway, a sense of motion without completion. To chant in that rhythm under the moonlight would feel like rocking, like drifting on water. One scholar suggested it might induce trance, drawing the mind into the same resonance as the stones. Others dismiss it as coincidence, or as the chronicler's attempt to capture a sound beyond his knowledge. Still, the detail lingers, a rhythm both martial and mystical, bridging cultures. You can almost feel it in your own breath. Inhale on 3, hold on 3, exhale on 2. The body sways, the chant vibrates in the chest. The night deepens, the moon glows brighter, and the silence fills with presence. The knights, trained in discipline, would find comfort in the order of the rhythm. The priests, trained in ritual, would find meaning in its resonance. Together they shared a song that belonged to neither alone. Was this heresy? To some, undeniably. To kneel beside Egyptian priests, to bow before a hybrid symbol, to chant in rhythms older than Christendom, such acts would condemn a knight before inquisitors. Yet within the moment itself, perhaps it was not heresy but harmony. The Templars may have seen in it the union of heaven and earth, the marriage of faiths not as betrayal, but as completion. Their enemies saw corruption, they felt communion. Skeptics argue the carving is misattributed, the chronicler's words exaggerated, the entire story born of imagination. They remind us that ruins attract legends, that travelers see what they wish to see, and they are not wrong. No proof binds the Templars to Heliopolis with iron certainty. Yet the fragments persist, a chant's rhythm, a carving's hybrid symbol, a chronicler's puzzled note. Together they create a resonance, faint but insistent, like the toll of a bell through mist. Picture the ritual again. The moon full, the chant low, the hybrid symbol glowing in silver. The knights' faces are pale, their eyes closed. The priests sway gently, their voices weaving. The stones hum, their carved hieroglyphs shimmering faintly as if awakened. For a moment, time folds. Egypt of the pharaohs, Christendom of the Crusaders, all blur into silence, into rhythm, into song. It is a moment outside history, preserved only in whispers. Later, when the Templars fell under accusation, some charges mentioned the worship of a head, a strange idol kissed in darkness. Perhaps those accusations twisted what had once been this, a knight bowing before an image not recognized by Rome, an image born of Egypt and Christ combined. To hostile eyes it was heresy, to the knights it may have been revelation. The chant fades, the moon sinks lower, the knights rise, their mantles stirring in the night breeze. The priests extinguish the torches, leaving only starlight, and silence returns, deeper than before, a silence filled with memory. The ruins hold the echo, the codex preserves the phrase, the carving hints at the vision, and history moves on, leaving behind only fragments for us to gather. The ritual at Heliopolis, whether fact or dream, serves as climax to the fragments we have traced. Papyrus, ruins, vaults, graffiti, codex. Each points toward blending, toward silence, toward communion beneath the sky. Here, in chant and moonlight, the threads converge, and then they scatter again, as history always does, leaving us to piece them together by torchlight centuries later. From this night of chant and silence, the story shifts once more. For beyond ritual and symbol, there were also movements of men, carts rolling under canvas, inventories scribbled in haste. Documents still speak of manuscripts received from mysterious hands, of sealed chests borne across the Nile. The trail of silence does not end in ritual. It winds back into ink and parchment, into the lists that hint at secrets transported, hidden, forgotten. The chronicles of war speak often of swords, of banners, of walls broken and rebuilt. Yet sometimes the truest stories lie in quieter movements, in the rattle of a cartwheel at night, in the creak of wood beneath canvas, in the hurried scrawl of a line added to an inventory. For the Templars, much of their secret history seems to live not in battles but in lists, in ledgers, in marginal notes, where scribes jotted details they scarcely understood. Among such notes, one phrase appears again and again: manuscript received from Mizra, the name by which Egypt is known in Arabic, here marked not as enemy but as giver. What manuscripts these were, no one can say with certainty. The ledgers do not describe their content, only that they were received, sealed, and carried. But the context is suggestive. The mention occurs beside records of chests loaded into carts, of convoys moving under cover, of sites half-built and abandoned. Imagine a narrow track winding through the Nile Delta at dusk. The river glimmers, reeds sway in the evening breeze. A line of carts moves slowly, their wheels crunching on the dry earth. Each is covered with canvas, tied down with ropes. The men walking beside them wear white mantles, the red cross faint in the fading light. They do not speak. Even the horses seem subdued, their snorts muffled, their hooves cushioned by sand. Within the carts lie chests, iron-banded, sealed with wax. On some of the seals, according to later accounts, there appeared a device, a circle enclosing a triangle, the same symbol that wrapped the papyrus of Hugo de Pontois. The image is compelling, knowledge carried like treasure, hidden as though it were gold, guarded with more vigilance than coin. But the knowledge weighs differently. A chest of manuscripts is lighter than a chest of silver, yet more dangerous if opened. And so the knights guarded them with silence, with secrecy, with the stillness of men who know their burden cannot be shared. One fragmentary note, preserved in a French archive, mentions such a convoy. The scribe records that covered carts of the brothers departed Damietta, bearing chests not to be opened. The line is brief, matter-of-fact, as though describing grain. Yet it hums with suggestion. Why specify that the chests not be opened? Who feared their contents and who insisted they remain sealed? Skeptics argue that these were no more than routine transports, archives of the order, records of landholdings, contracts, indulgences. Such documents were precious, yes, but not mystical. The phrase manuscript from Giza, they say, may mean nothing more exotic than devotional texts bought from Coptic monks, prayers, or psalters written in local script. The circle and triangle seal, if it existed, could have been a merchant's mark, a coincidence inflated by imagination. Yet others note the consistency. The phrase recurs in multiple places across decades. The sealed carts are mentioned in different contexts. The symbol surfaces not only on wax but on stone. Coincidence can explain one instance, perhaps two, but beyond that the echo grows difficult to ignore. You can place yourself on that road walking beside the carts. The night deepens, stars prickle in the sky. The air smells of river mud and smoke from distant hearths. The wheels turn, the canvas shifts, and for a moment you think you hear a faint rustle from within, a parchment shifting, a whisper of ink on vellum. The men beside you walk in silence, their faces set. One raises a hand and the convoy halts. A rider passes ahead, scanning the road. Then, as quietly as they stopped, they move on again, their destination unknown. Later inquisitors, searching for heresy, pressed captured knights about such convoys. Some confessed, under duress, to carrying forbidden writings, texts given by men in black robes. They spoke of agreements made in the south, of silence sworn. Their words are tangled, distorted by torture, yet certain phrases repeat: the gift of depth, the covenant of the south, the chests from Giza. Were these inventions or the echoes of real memory forced into words? The symbolism of the seal, the circle, and the triangle continues to puzzle, geometric, simple, yet laden with meaning. To some it was the eternal married to the divine, to others the earth enclosing the Trinity, and to others still it was neither Christian nor pagan, but something older, a mark of those who measured heavens and earth alike. The fact that it appears in accounts of both papyrus and cart suggests continuity, a language of symbols running through the order's hidden work. Scholars remain divided. Some dismiss the entire story as myth, a romance woven around mundane transport. Others see in it the clearest sign of a secret pursuit. For while gold and grain leave obvious traces, ledgers of debt, coins of mint, knowledge leaves subtler ones. A phrase in a margin, a seal described by a curious eye, a chest mentioned but never opened. These traces are fragile, but they endure. Picture again the convoy disappearing into the night, carts rolling softly, wheels biting into sand. The torches are few, the light dim. At the heart of each chest, ink lies silent on vellum, words waiting to be read. Yet they will not be read by us. They were sealed, carried, hidden, perhaps buried, perhaps destroyed. Their silence is unbroken, but their movement, the fact that they were carried at all, whispers still. In the rhythm of this story, the sealed carts are another beat. Papyrus, ruins, vaults, graffiti, codex, convoy. Each fragment joins the next, forming a chain that hums with the same motif. Beneath, silence, light. Whether or not the manuscripts survive, their journey marks the depth of the order's pursuit. And so the night deepens, the carts fade, and silence returns to the delta. But the story does not rest. From convoys and manuscripts, the path spirals into legend, into tales of a boy carried into Egypt under secret guard, a child said to bear a sacred bloodline. The documents may be gone, the chests sealed forever, but the whispers of protection and secrecy continue, embodied in the figure remembered only as the Pale Prince. Legends often gather around children, for children carry the promise of what is not yet known. Among the scattered whispers that shadow the Templars' history, one of the most haunting is that of a boy, unnamed in most sources, remembered only as the Pale Prince. His story is thin, a thread stretched across centuries, fragile as spider silk, yet it glimmers with the same motifs that run through papyrus, ruins and codices: secrecy, silence, and light hidden beneath. A Coptic text known as the Book of the Southern Gate, copied in the early 14th century, makes brief mention of a child of blood, not of our soil, brought to Giza by men of the white mantle. The line is enigmatic, offered without explanation, as though the scribe assumed his readers already knew the tale. Some interpret it as a reference to a refugee prince, perhaps the child of a defeated Crusader lord smuggled into Egypt. Others see in it something more dangerous, a child of sacred lineage, carried under guard, hidden among the faithful of Saqqara. Saqqara, the great necropolis, spreads across the desert like a city of the dead. Step pyramids rise against the horizon, mastabas crumble into sand, shafts plunge deep into the earth. Even now the place smells of dust and salt, a dryness that clings to the tongue. To imagine a child hidden here is unsettling. Yet the story insists the boy was placed among the Copts, guarded by men whose mantles bore the Red Cross, until he could be concealed no longer. The epithet Pale Prince may come from a description in later Portuguese law. At Tomar, the Templar stronghold in Portugal, there is said to be a carving of a boy holding both an Ankh and a cross. His face, worn by time, appears smooth and youthful, his features indistinct but luminous, as though carved to suggest radiance rather than detail. Local tradition calls him O Príncipe Pálido, the Pale Prince. Whether this relief truly depicts a child of legend or is simply a devotional image, later romanticized, no one can say. But the association has endured, and with endurance comes power. Imagine the child himself, pale in skin, perhaps sickly, perhaps simply fair. His eyes wide in the torchlight of Saqqara's underground halls, his small hand grasping both cross and Ankh as toys given by guardians. Around him, Coptic monks whisper prayers, their voices echoing in chambers of stone. Knights stand watch, armor muted, swords drawn not for conquest, but for protection. The air smells of oil lamps, of earth, of old incense. The boy yawns, curls into a blanket, and sleeps beneath walls carved thousands of years before Christendom. His presence there becomes a symbol, a point of convergence between old and new, life and death, silence and song. But what lineage could justify such secrecy? Some say he was of Merovingian descent, tied by blood to a line once claimed sacred. Others whisper he was of Crusader nobility, carrying a claim that threatened both East and West. A few suggest something more mythic, that he was the child of prophecy, a vessel of light to be hidden until the world was ready. Such claims are impossible to prove, yet the very impossibility makes them endure. Skeptics, of course, dismiss the entire tale. They argue the carving at Tomar is generic, not specific. They remind us that children of crusaders were often fostered with allies, and that to hide one among Copts was no stranger than to hide one in a monastery elsewhere. To them, the Pale Prince is no more than folklore, a story embroidered by centuries of mysticism. And yet even they admit the persistence of the motif. The boy, holding both cross and ankh, the child sheltered in silence, demands explanation. The Book of the Southern Gate offers another image. He was kept under the lion that drinks the sun. Scholars debate its meaning. Some believe it refers to a statue near Saqqara, a lion-shaped guardian worn by centuries, once aligned with the rising sun. Others think it symbolic, the Lion of Judah, the child of prophecy. The phrase lingers like a riddle. The lion that drinks the sun, the boy who sleeps beneath. Picture standing in Saqqara at dawn. The air is cool, the desert stretching in pale gold. A lion statue, eroded but proud, faces east. As the sun rises, its light touches the stone, as though the lion itself were drinking fire. Beneath its gaze, hidden chambers stretch underground, their walls etched with hieroglyphs. In one such chamber, so the story says, the boy lay, pale and small, the guardians keeping watch. The silence there is immense, the kind that swallows footsteps. Only the child's breathing breaks it, soft and steady. Later traditions carried westward, embroidered the tale. They claimed the boy was taken eventually to Portugal, hidden within the Templar stronghold at Tomar, where he grew in silence until he vanished from record. The carving of the child holding cross and ankh, whether original or later, became the echo of that story. Some say he died young, never fulfilling prophecy. Others say he lived, his lineage scattered like seeds across Europe. Still others claim he was never more than simple, never flesh at all. In this uncertainty lies the heart of the legend. The Pale Prince is less a person than an idea, the union of traditions, the marriage of symbols, the embodiment of secrecy. Whether he lived or not, his story embodies the silence the Templars carried, the silence of things too dangerous to be spoken. You can almost see him even now, walking between worlds. His small hands grasp both ankh and cross, his eyes wide beneath torchlight, his figure pale against the dark of the tomb. Around him, knights kneel, priests chant, the desert breathes. He is child and symbol, fragile and eternal. And the silence that surrounds him is not absence, but protection. The Pale Prince may never have lived, or he may have lived and died forgotten. Yet his story persists, folded into carvings, copied into marginal notes, whispered in chronicles. Persistence itself is power, for legends that survive across centuries do so because they answer a need, a hunger in the human mind for connection, for union, for light hidden beneath stone. Thus the Pale Prince takes his place among the fragments, papyrus, ruins, vaults, codex, convoys, child. Each hums with the same motif, beneath silence, light. Together they form not a history certain, but a history felt. And perhaps that is the truer kind. From the boy's silence beneath the lion that drinks the sun, the story expands once more. It moves from legend to symbol, from child to creed, from carvings to doctrines half suppressed. For beyond the Pale Prince lies the larger debate, the merging of Horus and Christ, the blending of cross and ankh, not merely as images, but as philosophies. The tale turns now toward that mingling, toward the accusation and the suppression, toward the question of what happens when two truths are seen as one. When we speak of Egypt, we cannot help but speak of Horus, the falcon-eyed god, child of Isis, avenger of Osiris, guardian of the sky. His form adorns countless walls, his eyes wide and piercing, his wings outstretched. Long before the first crusader drew a sword, Horus was worshipped beneath the blazing sun, his myth woven into the very air of the Nile. And yet centuries later, whispers tell of knights kneeling before images that joined Horus to Christ, that placed the falcon beside the lamb, the Ankh beside the cross. The evidence is fragmentary but persistent. A burned manuscript, its ashes preserved in an inquisitor's record, was said to contain drawings of a bird-headed man holding the cross of our Lord. Another, seized from a Coptic scribe, spoke of two truths bound as one, the child of Isis and the child of Mary. These scraps may be exaggerations, accusations meant to damn rather than describe, but they resonate with the larger pattern, a fascination with union, with the marriage of old and new. Imagine entering a dim chapel near Heliopolis, a place where priests once offered to Ra, now repurposed for Christian prayer. On the altar lies not a crucifix alone, but a carving where the loop of the Ankh entwines with the cross. The candlelight flickers, and in the shadows, the falcon of Horus seems to gaze at the crucified Christ, their forms blending, their meanings colliding. To stand there is to feel the air thick with tension. Is this blasphemy or revelation? Is it corruption or completion? One Coptic chronicle notes a strange procession. Knights in white carried an icon of the Virgin, and beside it placed a lunar disc crowned with horns, the emblem of Hathor. The villagers, bewildered, described it as the mixing of water and wine, the joining of symbols. Whether this account is faithful or fanciful, it captures the essence of the accusation, that the Templars were not content to keep faith pure, but sought to blend, to unite. Skeptics dismiss such stories as projection. They remind us that conquerors often impose their symbols on local shrines, and that to find a cross beside an Egyptian relic proves nothing but proximity. They argue that inquisitors delighted in exaggerating heresy, and that no knight would dare worship Horus, and yet the skeptics themselves must acknowledge the recurring theme. Again and again we hear of cross and Ankh, of Christ and Horus, of two truths folded together. Coincidence grows thin when repeated across centuries. The fascination may lie in the parallels. Horus, the child of Isis born miraculously, avenges his father, ascends to rule the heavens. Christ, the child of Mary, born miraculously, avenges sin, ascends to heaven. Both are sons of goddesses, both are saviors, both are light. To those with eyes open to pattern, the similarity would have seemed uncanny. To those with hearts bound by Rome, it would have seemed dangerous. Picture a knight, weary from years of battle, kneeling in an Egyptian chapel. His faith is strong, yet he cannot ignore what he sees, the people praying to Isis as mother, to Horus as son, their chants echoing the hymns of his own youth. He sees in the falcon's eye a reflection of the Christ he serves. He sees in the Ankh's loop the eternal life promised by his creed. And so he bends, not in betrayal, but in recognition. For him, Horus and Christ are not rivals, but reflections, two halves of a truth larger than any church could hold. But for the authorities, such merging was intolerable. The church thrived on distinction, on boundaries. To suggest that Christ and Horus were alike was to blur lines carefully drawn, to loosen the authority of dogma. And so documents were seized, burned, suppressed. Inquisitors wrote bitterly of foreign signs that corrupt the true path, of strange drawings that confound the faithful. They turned whispers into charges, charges into trials, trials into executions. Silence was enforced not by resonance but by fire, yet silence has its own endurance. Even as documents burned, fragments survived, in sketches hidden in margins, in carvings overlooked, in stories carried by word of mouth. The Ankh and cross together became a motif not easily erased. In certain European chapels, a looped cross appears, its origin unexplained. In Portuguese stonework, a boy holds both. In whispered tales, knights spoke of a truth that could not be spoken. The suppression itself, paradoxically, made the story stronger. For that which is forbidden often takes on the aura of the eternal. Imagine the burning of one such manuscript, the air filled with smoke, the ink curling into flame, the vellum twisting. Around the fire stand men in robes, their faces stern. Yet one scribe, his heart heavy, copies a single symbol into the margin of another book before the fire consumes the rest. That small act of preservation is enough. Centuries later, the symbol resurfaces, a ghostly echo of what was meant to be destroyed. And so the merging of Horus and Christ survives not in grand declarations, but in fragments. A burned manuscript, a carving in shadow, a chronicle puzzled by strange processions. Each fragment fragile, yet together they hum with the same motif. Beneath, silence, light. They suggest that beneath dogma, beneath suppression, there lay a vision of unity, a song of two truths entwined. Critics will always insist it is myth. They may be right. History is tangled and proof is rare. Yet whether myth or memory, the story persists, and persistence itself is its own kind of truth. For if so many whisper the same union, perhaps the union itself is real, not in fact, but in meaning. Close your eyes and you can almost hear it. A hymn, half Latin, half Coptic, sung in a ruined chapel under moonlight. The falcon of Horus gazes from the wall, the crucifix gleams on the altar, and the voices mingle until they are indistinguishable. The chant rises, fills the air, then fades into silence. And in that silence, the truth remains, two names, one light. From here, the story turns toward its closing spiral. Having traced papyrus, ruins, convoys, princes, codices, and suppressed texts, we begin to see the shape of the whole, a spiral of history, winding deeper, then rising again. The order sought not conquest alone, but knowledge. Knowledge they may have chosen to bury rather than reveal. For the closer we come to their end, the clearer it seems that they sealed their secrets not with locks but with silence. History, when traced carefully, does not move in a straight line. It curls back on itself, doubling, spiraling, leaving patterns rather than progress. The story of the Templars in Egypt seems to embody this spiral most clearly. They descended into chambers where sound itself hummed, studied ruins aligned with solstice, copied manuscripts that whispered of light beneath the stone. They blended symbols, knelt beside foreign priests, perhaps sheltered a child of prophecy. And then, rather than proclaim what they had found, they folded it inward, burying it beneath silence. The spiral appears even in their architecture. In Tomar, in Portugal, the great round church of the order winds inwards like a coiled shell. Pilgrims walking within it are drawn step by step toward the center, each circle leading deeper until they stand beneath a dome painted with visions of heaven. To enter is to spiral. To leave is to spiral again, outward into the world. The very shape suggests a philosophy. Truth is not seized in a line, but approached in loops, in turns, in silence. Imagine the Templars gathered in Cairo, in the ruins of Heliopolis, or the vaults beneath the pyramids. They stand around a pillar carved with spirals, the grooves catching torchlight. They do not shout, they do not argue, they wait. The silence itself becomes the teaching, the spiral, the lesson. They understood perhaps that knowledge too dangerous to hold in the open must be turned inward, sealed in symbol, hidden in silence. One late chronicle, hostile to the order, accuses them of burying treasures of thought as though they were gold. The phrase is mocking but revealing. To their enemies, silence was cowardice. To the brothers themselves, silence was duty. They had seen the light beneath stone. They had heard the resonance of chambers tuned to eternity. Perhaps they knew that to reveal such things was to unleash questions no authority could contain. Consider the papyrus of Hugo de Pontois again. Its final line reads, "The light beneath the stone has changed us. Changed how? We cannot know, but change, once undergone, cannot be undone." If the knights felt themselves altered, they may have realized that to spread such change would be to tear apart the world they served. Better then to spiral inward, to guard silence, to let the secret breathe only in echoes. Skeptics argue this interpretation romanticizes caution into philosophy. They insist the order collapsed not because of hidden knowledge, but because of debts, envy, and the king's greed. And they are right, in part. Power and money weighed heavily. Yet even skeptics admit that secrecy defined the Templars. Their rituals, their codes, their vaults, all wrapped in silence. To imagine that silence held only prayers and not discoveries is to ignore the resonance that hums beneath the fragments we have traced. Picture silence as they might have known it. In a chamber deep below stone, the air is cool, the torchlight dim. Around you, brothers kneel, their mantles white in the gloom. No voice speaks, no prayer is said aloud, and yet the silence itself is full, pressing, vibrant. You feel it in your bones, in your breath. It is not absence, but presence, the spiral closing around you. In that silence, knowledge is sealed, not destroyed. Even the accusations of heresy at their trial reflect this spiral. Inquisitors pressed them for idols, for rituals, for names. The knights often answered only with silence, or with phrases too brief to grasp. Some scholars see this as proof of guilt. Others see it as loyalty, to each other, to their vow, to the secret they carried. To spiral inward even under fire is to prove that silence was more powerful than survival. The motif of the spiral recurs in their symbols as well. Coins minted in the order's later years show interlocking circles. Manuscripts attributed to them contain diagrams where triangles turn within circles, circles within squares, always suggesting motion inward. Even their accusations of spitting on the cross, of worshipping strange heads, can be read as distortions of a truth, that they sought meaning not in surface, but in depth, in spirals beneath dogma. Imagine again the round church at Tamar. You enter, the air cool, the incense faint, candles flicker, their light soft. The walls curve, leading you step by step inward until you stand at the heart. Above you, paintings gleam, Christ enthroned, angels circling. But below in stone the spiral hums. You realize that the shape itself is a teaching, that to walk it is to rehearse silence, to feel truth not in words, but in movement. The order may have carried this lesson from Egypt, from the papyrus, from the vaults where song and light entwined. Scholars debate endlessly whether the Templars truly discovered anything in Egypt. Some deny they ever set foot near the pyramids, others insist their traces remain. But even if the details blur, the spiral remains. Their story is not of conquest alone, nor of treasure, but of silence folded upon silence, secrets spiraled inward, until they could not be reached. To us, centuries later, the spiral still holds. We trace it in papyrus lines, in graffiti on granite, in lunar codices, in legends of pale children. Each fragment is a loop, each loop a turn inward. We may never reach the center, yet the act of circling itself becomes meaning. The spiral teaches us patience, teaches us to listen, teaches us that silence is not void but fullness. Perhaps this is why the story endures. We sense in it not answers but depth, not certainty but resonance. The Templars' silence becomes our silence, their spiral, our path. To follow them is not to uncover treasure, but to walk the circle, to hear the hum, to let the light beneath stone change us in ways we cannot name. And so as we near the end of their tale, the spiral begins to slow. The circles widen, the resonance softens, the silence deepens. Yet even as it slows, it holds, steady and unbroken. The brothers fade into history, their order crushed, their names burned. But the spiral does not die, it continues, carried in fragments, in symbols, in whispers. From here, the story bends toward its last loop. It will pass through fire, the trials, the suppression, the end of the order. It will pass through silence, their refusal to confess, their vow carried into death. And then it will settle into stillness, into the wind down where history breathes quietly, leaving us to dream. When dawn broke on Friday the 13th of October 1307, the bells of Paris rang not for prayer but for arrest. Across France, Knights of the Temple were seized in their commanderies, dragged from chapels, chained in cells. Their order, once feared and revered, was broken overnight by the will of a king and the blessing of a pope. Officially, the charges were many: idolatry, heresy, corruption. Unofficially, the motive was clearer. Philip the Fair hungered for their wealth, and Clement V sought to appease him. Yet beneath the politics lay something more elusive: silence. For when inquisitors questioned the brothers, pressing them with accusations, their answers were often few. Some confessed under torture, their words twisted by fire and rack. Others spoke little or nothing. Chroniclers record that again and again, when asked of their rituals, their symbols, their secrets, the brothers replied with silence. That silence itself became damning. To their accusers, refusal to answer was proof of guilt. To modern readers, it may suggest something else, that the brothers would rather die than speak, that they carried vows deeper than survival. If they had indeed encountered mysteries in Egypt, papyrus, codices, songs beneath stone, they would not betray them, even when the flames rose. Picture a dungeon in Paris. The air is damp, thick with the smell of mold and sweat. A knight sits chained, his mantle torn, his hair matted. Across from him, an inquisitor reads a list of charges: spitting on the cross, worshipping idols, kissing forbidden symbols. The knight listens, his eyes hollow. When asked to reply, he lowers his gaze and says nothing. The silence stretches, the inquisitor grows angry. Yet the knight remains still, his lips pressed together. His silence speaks louder than any confession. Some did confess, broken by pain. Their words mention heads worshipped, cats adored, strange rites performed in shadow. Scholars now see these as distortions, fragments pulled from truth and reshaped by agony. But the consistency of certain phrases, the covenant of the South, the light beneath stone, the chests from Giza, suggests that memory bled through even under torture. If the knights had nothing to hide, why did such phrases persist? If they had everything to hide, why did they risk speaking them at all? Skeptics argue that inquisitors planted the words, that confessions were rehearsed. They are not wrong. Yet the persistence of motif, the same echoes in different places, different mouths, gives pause. For silence is not only the absence of speech, it is also the shape of what is withheld. and what was withheld here seems always to circle back to the same motifs: depth, beneath, light, silence. The suppression was ruthless. Commanderies were dissolved, treasuries seized, archives destroyed, manuscripts vanished into flames or papal vaults. The great master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake on the Ile de la Cité in 1314. Witnesses say he cried out not curses but prophecy that before a year was gone both Pope and King would meet their deaths. And so it happened, as though silence itself had spoken. Imagine that final scene. The master bound, the fire crackling at his feet, the Seine flowing black beside him. Smoke rises, the crowd murmurs, the night wind stirs. He lifts his head, his voice calm, and declares his innocence. No secret is revealed, no ritual confessed. Instead, he entrusts the silence itself to time, letting the flames consume his body while the vow remains unbroken. The crowd shivers, not from the heat, but from the weight of that silence. After the suppression, the order was scattered. Some brothers fled to Portugal, where the Order of Christ rose in their place. Others vanished into obscurity, absorbed by local communities. Legends say a few carried the secret with them, hiding it in mountains, in manuscripts, in cathedrals disguised as fortresses. The truth cannot be proven, yet the persistence of Templar motifs, spirals, crosses entwined with ankhs, silence guarded by stone, suggests that the vow did not die with their bodies. Scholars argue still. Some insist the Templars had no secret at all, that their downfall was political theatre. Others maintain that secrecy itself was the core of their identity, whether or not it hid a truth. To hold silence as treasure is itself powerful. For silence resists fire, resists accusation, resists time. Picture the spiral again, curling inward. The order's fall was not a collapse in a straight line, but a spiral tightening into silence. Each arrest, each trial, each execution folded the secret further inward until nothing remained on the surface. Yet within the silence, the motif hummed, beneath, light, depth, song. Those who sought to erase them found themselves haunted. The silence does not vanish, it echoes. And so the Templars' end became their greatest preservation. By refusing to speak, by choosing silence even at the stake, they ensured that whatever they had seen in Egypt, whatever manuscripts they had carried, whatever rituals they had performed, would remain unresolved. Uncertainty itself became the legacy. And uncertainty is stronger than certainty, for it cannot be disproved. It lingers, it spirals, it hums. Close your eyes and hear it. The bells toll, the crowd murmurs, the flames crackle. Beneath it all lies silence, heavy, unyielding, eternal. The vow unbroken, the secret unspoken. The order destroyed in flesh, yet preserved in absence. That absence becomes presence, a resonance carried across centuries. From here, the story softens. The spiral slows, the resonance fades. The Templars pass from history into legend, their silence drifting into the dreams of those who listen. The light beneath the stone grows dim, not extinguished, but quiet, waiting. And as the final section begins, the story itself will enter silence, winding down like a chant, fading into the night. The story has wound its way through centuries, looping and spiraling like a bell's echo in fog. We began with knights in white mantles descending into the earth of Egypt, following whispers of papyrus and rumor, tracing fragments in stone and symbol. We moved through ruins that aligned with the heavens, through vaults that hummed with resonance, through graffiti scrawled in hidden chambers, through manuscripts carried in silence across the Nile. We touched upon the pale prince, fragile as a dream, and upon the union of Horus and Christ, dangerous yet luminous. We watched the order spiral inward, their vows sealed by fire, their silence preserved even as their flesh was consumed. And now, as all stories must, we slow, we soften, we rest. History is never whole. It is fragments, shards of pottery in the sand, half-erased lines in a ledger, symbols carved where no one should carve. To follow those fragments is to walk through mist, hearing bells toll in the distance, never certain of their source. The Templar's story is one such mist. It does not yield certainty, only resonance. And resonance is what lulls us now, drawing us not toward answers, but toward rest. Imagine the desert night after all has ended. The fires of the trials have gone out, the cries have faded. The city above is quiet, the river flowing dark and patient. Beneath the earth, the chambers remain. The papyrus lies dusted in sand, the graffiti faint on granite, the vault echoing with silence. The ruins still align with solstice, their stones waiting for light to return. And if you close your eyes, you can hear it. A hum beneath breath, a song beneath stone, faint but steady, timeless as sleep. The motifs linger like dream fragments. Steel, the armor of knights, once hard, now rusting into silence. Bells, their toll marking both battle and prayer, now softened into distant resonance. Mist, the veil that hides truth, the breath that cools the desert night. Forest, not of trees here, but of pillars and obelisks, a stone forest whispering of eternity. And beneath all, the deeper motifs, depth, beneath, silence, light. They have carried us like waves, and now they carry us toward stillness. Picture yourself walking slowly through Cairo at night. The alleys are quiet, lanterns dim, the air heavy with spice and dust. You leave the streets and step into ruins, stones pale beneath moonlight. Ahead lies a narrow doorway opening into shadow. You pass inside, the air cool, the sound muted. You descend into a chamber where walls curve like the inside of a shell. The silence is immense, soft, welcoming. You feel the hum in your chest, not loud, not frightening, just steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. You sit, you breathe, you listen, and in that listening, you drift. The Templars may have chosen silence because they understood its power. Silence is protection, silence is transformation, silence is continuity. Words can be burned, but silence cannot. It passes from chamber to chamber, from stone to stone, from century to century. It reaches us still here, now, through fragments that hum like faint bells. We do not need certainty, we need only resonance. And resonance is enough to guide us into dreams. Think again of the papyrus. Its last line reads, "The light beneath the stone has changed us." Those words linger like a lullaby. Light beneath stone, soft, hidden, steady. Change, not violent, but gentle, like the slow shift of stars across the sky. To be changed is not to be broken, it is to be folded inward, to spiral into new silence. As you breathe, you can feel that light beneath your own thoughts, quiet, glowing, waiting. The pale prince sleeps still beneath the lion that drinks the sun. The manuscripts lie sealed in carts that never open. The cross and Ankh rest entwined in vellum browned with time. The graffiti fades but does not vanish. The codex hums with lunar rhythm, and the spiral holds, turning inward, carrying all of it into silence. Each fragment rests where it is, undisturbed, as you now rest where you are, undisturbed. Scholars will argue forever, turning fragments into theories, theories into disputes. But arguments fade at night. In the hush of evening, when the world is quiet, only the motifs remain. Depth, beneath, silence, light. These are not theories, but sensations, You can feel depth in your breath, beneath in your heartbeat, silence in your stillness, light in your mind's drifting. These are the truths that remain when words fall away. The story does not end with revelation. It ends with rest. Like the Templars, we spiral inward, folding the fragments into silence. We let the echoes fade, we let the motifs soften, we let the resonance carry us into stillness. History becomes dream, the past becomes presence, silence becomes sleep. Close your eyes now and walk again through the desert night. The air is cool, the stars bright, the sand soft beneath your feet. In the distance, a bell tolls once, then fades into mist. Ahead, a forest of stone rises, pillars gleaming pale in moonlight. You step among them, your footsteps silent. The forest hums with memory, but it does not press, it soothes. You feel yourself slowing, your body heavy, your mind drifting. The spiral carries you inward, deeper, softer, until nothing remains but quiet. The Templars are gone, their order broken, but their silence remains, and in that silence we rest. The light beneath the stone glows faintly still, not harsh, not burning, but soft as candlelight, steady as breath. It changes us not with force, but with gentleness, folding us into stillness. That stillness is yours now, a gift of depth, a gift of beneath, a gift of silence. Let the hum fade into your heartbeat. Let the motifs dissolve into dream. Let the spiral carry you down, 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 into the deep silence where sleep begins. And so with the story's breath now gentle, with its light soft beneath the stone, I leave you here, in silence, in stillness, in rest. May your dreams be deep, may your night be calm, may the secret breathe with you until morning.